Dzień dobry Państwu, witamy Państwa bardzo serdecznie na seminarium Parlamentarzyści przeciwko handlowi ludźmi. Jest mi niezmiernie miło powitać Państwa, od razu też przepraszając za nieobecność przewodniczącego Komisji Sprawiedliwości, pana posła Ryszarda Kalisza, który wkrótce do nas dotrze prosto z Trybunału Konstytucyjnego, gdzie reprezentuje Sejm, ale jest ze mną pan przewodniczący, zastępca przewodniczącego komisji, pan poseł Robert Biedroń. Seminarium na temat zapobiegania handlowi ludźmi, a krajowe procedury zgłaszania przypadków handlu ludźmi. Jest to temat niezwykle istotny, a o znaczeniu, wadze tej problematyki najlepiej świadczy też skład uczestników dzisiejszego spotkania. Chciałbym szczególnie ciepło powitać panią Stanę Buchowską, współorganizatorkę seminarium z ramienia programu Parlamentarzyści przeciwko handlowi ludźmi i pozostałych przedstawicieli programu. Ogromnie się cieszę, że jest z nami przedstawiciel Human Trafficking Foundation na czele z panem Antonem Spinem. Witam ciepło. Witam także przedstawicieli Ambasady Brytyjskiej, a w szczególności zastępcę szefa misji panią Jessikę Glover. Ze szczególną radością witam także parlamentarzystów z innych krajów, a z nami na sali są przedstawiciele parlamentów z Czech, Danii, Estonii, Litwy, Polski, Portugalii, Słowacji i Wielkiej Brytanii. Witam także oczywiście w sposób szczególnie ciepły gospodarzy, czyli przedstawicieli polskiego parlamentu, ale także urzędników, których widzę na sali, przedstawicieli Prokuratury Generalnej, Ministerstwa Sprawiedliwości, Ministerstwa Spraw Zagranicznych, Ministerstwa Spraw Wewnętrznych, Biura Rzecznika Praw Obywatelskich, przedstawicieli Komendy Głównej, Policji i Straży Granicznej. Chciałbym także bardzo mocno zaznaczyć, że nasze dzisiejsze seminarium to kontynuacja cyklu spotkań poświęconych tej tematyce. Poprzednio odbyły się w Londynie, w Hadze, a ostatnia w marcu tego roku w Rzymie. Na początku bardzo gorąco proszę o zabranie głosu panią Jessikę Glover, zastępcę szefa misji Ambasady Brytyjskiej w Warszawie, a później poproszę o zabranie głosu przez pana Antoniego Spina. Proszę bardzo.
Dziękuję bardzo. Panowie posłowie, panie posłanki, szanowni państwo. Niezmiernie miło jest mi powitać państwa na dzisiejszym spotkaniu. Bardzo się cieszę, że tak licznie przybyli także posłowie z innych krajów. To dowodzi, jak bardzo ważny jest temat dzisiejszej konferencji w polskim parlamencie. Jak tylko dowiedziałam się o tym projekcie kilka miesięcy temu, to od razu podzieliłam się tą informacją z moimi kolegami pracującymi w innych ambasadach brytyjskich w tym regionie. Mam nadzieję, że chociaż kilkoro z państwa dowiedziało się o tym spotkaniu w sumie dzięki mnie. Dzielenie się informacją i doświadczeniami to klucz do sukcesu nie tylko w przypadku projektu regionalnego, to klucz do każdego sukcesu, także do efektywnej współpracy na rzecz zwalczania takich przestępstw jak handel ludźmi. Handel ludźmi nie zna granic. Przestępcy współpracują szybko i sprawnie, aby osiągnąć zamierzony cel. To ścisła współpraca pomiędzy krajami, pomiędzy agencjami wewnątrz państwa da nam szansę na zastawienie im czoła. W Wielkiej Brytanii już dawno odkryliśmy potrzebę angażowania wielu organizacji w wybudowanie partnerstwa na rzecz zwalczania przestępstw, szczególnie dzieci o dużym wymiarze społecznym, bo handel ludźmi to także problem społeczny, to problem globalny. Od 2009 roku w Wielkiej Brytanii funkcjonuje Krajowy Mechanizm Referencji, National Referral Mechanism, w skrócie NRM. Wielka Brytania wdrożyła ten mechanizm, stosując w ten sposób do zaleceń Rady Europy, a konkretnie konwencję o handlu ludźmi. W sercu każdego narodowego mechanizmu referencyjnego leży dobro ofiary i to o ofiarach należy pamiętać debatując nad sposobem zwalczania tego potwornego przestępstwa. W Wielkiej Brytanii handel ludźmi zwalczany jest przez wiele agent państwowych i organizacji pozarządowych. Brytyjskie Centrum do Spraw Handlu Ludźmi, UK Human Trafficking Center, działa pod auspicjami Agencji do Spraw Zwalczania Poważnej Zorganizowanej Przestępczości, Serious Organized Crime Agency. I jest mi bardzo miło witać pan Anthony Steen, który jest przewodniczącym tego UK Human Trafficking Center. Stawia on sobie narzędny cel stać się krajowym punktem kontaktowym, który zapewnia całościowe podejście do ofiar tego okrutnego przestępstwa. Nasi parlamentarzyści także biorą czynny udział w pracy na rzecz zwalczania tego przestępstwa. W Izbie Gmin działa Komisja Spraw Wewnętrznych. Jej przewodniczący, poseł Keith Baz, był w Polsce z wizytą kilka lat temu, aby nawiązać współpracę z polskimi parlamentarzystami i organizacjami pozarządowymi. Nasza ambasada już od ponad 10 lat aktywnie wspiera inicjatywy mające na celu zwalczanie handlu ludźmi. Nasze doświadczenie we współpracy z Polską i polskimi organizacjami jest bardzo dobre. Cieszymy się bardzo dobrymi relacjami na wszystkich poziomach. Wymiany doświadczeń eksperckich, współpracy organizacji pozarządowych, współpracy operacyjnej i na najwyższych szczeblach państwowych. To z inicjatywy Polski i Wielkiej Brytanii kraje G6 zaangażowali się w wielką kampanię informacyjno-prewencyjną w latach 2007-2008. Myślę, że okoronowaniem naszych działań w Polsce była współpraca nad badaniem opinii publicznej, co Polacy wiedzą na temat handlu ludźmi w 2010 roku. To badanie pokazało nam dwie zasadnicze rzeczy. Po pierwsze, jak wiele jest jeszcze do zrobienia, jeśli chodzi o uwrażliwienie i edukację społeczeństwa o problemie handlu ludźmi. A po drugie, to, że trudne wyzwanie o wiele łatwiej podejmuje się zespołowo. Raport w wersji elektronicznej jest dostępny na naszej stronie internetowej www.uk.poland.fco.gov.uk. Maybe Google it. Mam nadzieję, że dzisiejsze spotkanie okaże się ciekawe, a dyskusje zaowocują pogłębioną współpracą międzynarodową i kolejnymi projektami. Powodzenia i dziękuję za uwagę.
Dziękujemy bardzo. A teraz oddajemy głos naszemu gościowi specjalnemu, parlamentarzyście.
In Parliament in Britain, Mr. Brytyjska, we have a problem when debates have a lot of time to run, and the whips who run the government come along to you and whisper behind your ear, this debate has to go on till 10:30, and you must keep talking. It's called filibustering, and you just talk about anything in order to keep the time running until the debate ends, to stop the opposition coming in to speak instead. Now, I see from the programme that this part of the debate finishes at 10:30, and it is very much like filibustering in the House of Commons to keep running for 40 minutes when you have a 5-minute speech. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm then going to ask Baroness Butler-Sloss, who's joint chairman of the House of Commons and House of Lords Parliamentary Group on Human Trafficking, to explain what the parliamentary group does in the Parliament. She, I don't know, is experienced as I am on filibustering, but I'm sure she'll do a very good job. Can I first of all thank you very much, Mr. Brytyjska, for coming this morning. I gather you have an illustrious career as former Minister for Justice, and it gives this meeting an added quality to have you here chairing this particular session, and thank you very much for coming. And also, thank you very much for inviting us. Can I just explain why, to me, this is a very important and exciting occasion? When I first met Mr. Kalish about 3 or 4 years ago, we dreamt up together the idea that human trafficking wasn't going to be tackled in Europe, let alone in the world, unless parliamentarians got together and actually formed a network. Just like the police have a network in which they are supposed to cooperate over borders. The idea was that we should have parliamentarians not just in 1 or 2 countries, but right across the EU, who were actually talking the same language, knew the problems, and inspired the police, the border agencies, and the NGOs to do something collectively to fight what everybody in the world presumed actually went away 200 years ago, when William Wilberforce in Britain in 1807 actually outlawed throughout the world the British use of slaves. And everybody, if you talk to the average man on the street, presumes that slavery is gone. And when you say we have slaves today, they sort of think we belong to some strange sect. And we're not in the same communication channels, and they move on very quickly. I find if I go to social occasions and say I'm involved in fighting slavery, they move very quickly away because they think this is some strange organisation that I'm involved in. And yet, modern day slavery, and these are some interesting statistics which nobody's ever checked. Modern day slavery, according to a Dutch professor I met in Austria, whose name I conveniently forget, she told me that there are more slaves in the world today than there ever were in the 350 years of the Atlantic slave trade. And then you get figures from the United Nations when they say it's $36 billion a year commercial gain to traffickers. I don't know how they work it out, and whether they have a department, a special department of actuaries and accountants, working out where the traffickers and how much money each one get. If they don't pay tax, I'm not quite sure how they can work out it is that figure, $36 billion, but that's the figure they give. And then the European Commission, and I don't know how they get this figure, has said there's 100,000 slaves in the EU. Now, as the whole operation of trafficking and modern-day slavery is hidden, how can you say, in spite of it being hidden, there's 100,000 slaves in the EU? I don't know how they calculate it. And then you have another problem. The media. We all love the media, but the media needs figures, and the media needs victims. Because there's no case, unless you, as you know, as lawyers, unless you have the body, you can't have a murder. Well, how can you actually have a story about something that nobody knows anything about? It's a bit like the Emperor's clothes. Everybody says, aren't they wonderful clothes, but he's not wearing any. And it's the same with human trafficking. Where is it? We don't see it in the streets. Or do we? And that's the question I often ask myself. When one's travelling on the London Underground, is one sitting next to a modern-day slave, with a man on the other side who actually prevents her saying anything? We had in the middle of London, just recently, a domestic who was a slave in a flat for 6 months and hadn't got out. Was brought in from Qatar with 2 people and was locked in when they went to work. After 6 months, the concierge of the flat discovered her and rescued her and went to the police. And again, in Slovakia, I got and have got talking to the Slovakian embassy in London. They tell me upwards of 150 men have come into the Slovakian embassy in London in the last 18 months asking for passports. And when they were tackled, all of them were duped and deceived by traffickers in Slovakia into saying there were jobs in London. And when they came to London, they did have jobs, they didn't get a penny piece for it. And they were, in fact, duped, deceived by traffickers. And then I was deputed from the British Parliament for 2 years. I did 2 months in each year onto the Metropolitan Police. I was the oldest policeman on the streets of London. And if you went down Oxford Street, I was there with various policemen looking for trafficked children. Now, in London 2 years ago, we identified 1,003 children on the streets of London, mostly Romanian and Bulgarian, who were involved in pickpocketing, in shoplifting and ATM thefts. And it's hard to believe, and I put the figure lower than the police have, but some of the very nimble young men in their teens who were taught by the traffickers could bring in £80,000 a year into the traffickers' coffers from ATM thefts. Now, these boys and girls were not criminals as such. They were duped children into making the parents of those children believe that they would be educated in England. Yes, they certainly were educated in England. But the parents would have got £5,000, perhaps, by the traffickers for the child to be released under their care and control. Those children were slaves. And I actually been on a police raid where we actually went into these houses. I don't know why the police always raid at crack of dawn. It was like 6 a.m. They wanted to have everybody up early, looking very blurry-eyed, without any breakfast, going on a raid. I thought it would be much more civilised if the police did it at lunchtime, but they don't. And we went out at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning and raided a complete street looking for trafficked children, and we found them. And we also found other things to do with trafficking. So, I didn't know about this. And I walk about my business every day. I didn't see the girl in Sloane Square, who was a domestic slave. I didn't see the children, or any of them, until we raided the houses. And on sex slaves, well, I have raided a number of massage parlours and brothels. I wouldn't say I'm an authority on it, but I certainly have learned quite a bit about how that works as well. And again, in London, I don't know what it's like in Warsaw, and I don't know whether you even know the figures, but in London, the police say there's 2,200 brothels in London, with 5 or 6 girls in each brothel. That's about 12 or 13,000 girls in London in brothels. Now, I've never met a girl who voluntarily wants to be in a brothel, but they're either on drugs, because that's one of the things the traffickers make them get on, and they became dependent on the traffickers and they're dependent on being in the brothel to earn their drugs, or they have children back in Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, and therefore they have to go on providing money, and if they stop being in the brothel, they don't know how their children are going to survive. I haven't met a woman who voluntarily wants to be in a brothel, but the police say that they think around half the number of women in the brothels in London may have been trafficked. Now, these are quite big figures. And last week, the Sunday Times, who've been a great supporter of our work, identified that children go missing from children's homes in Britain. And I can tell you how that works. A child arrives at an airport or port and claims asylum. Once they are put in a children's home near the airport, that children's home isn't a prison. It's a private-run children's home. And that child will go missing probably within 48 hours from that home. They have mobile phones. Even if they don't have mobile phones, they have an agreement with the traffickers. Within X number of hours, they'll be at the tree at the end of the road, so they know where the children's home is in relation to that particular airport. Children go missing, and EGPAC, which are one of the partners of this project, 4 years ago, did say that there were some 300 or 400 children going missing from, I think, 3 local authorities. It was Newcastle, I may have my figures wrong, Newcastle, Manchester and Birmingham, and children went missing in that way. And nobody knew who they were, where they were, and they don't know if they were ever found. So we have this whole subculture underground going on all over the country, and the parliamentary group, which Baroness Butler-Sloss is the joint chairman, she'll be saying a word in a moment, about the parliamentary group is absolutely alive and alert to this. Now, the plan which Mr. Kalish and myself dreamt up was we would get the European Commission interested in supporting, at the parliamentary level, a network of parliamentarians. And 1 year ago, and I've got to thank them for this, although it was quite a battle, I can tell you, the European Commission agreed to fund 80% of a European Commission parliamentary network group. The other 20% came from an English charitable trust fund. And the partners are, besides the Human Trafficking Foundation, there are ECPAT, who are well known all over the country and all over the world for their work in trying to end child prostitution, and the high-level group of fighting children, the Associata, not the fighting children, fighting children's rights, the Associata in Romania, and I'm very glad that the two directors are here today, and that is chaired by Baroness Nicholson in the House of Lords. It is a Romanian group, and she's very involved in Romania. So it's marvellous. We've got a Romanian NGO, and we've got 2 UK NGOs. But we don't want to make this a UK project. We want to make this an EU project. And therefore, the Polish side of this is terribly important. And Mr. Kalish has focused today on how do we identify victims of human trafficking. Now, we have in Britain something called the NRM. I think you have one as well. It is a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare. On the other hand, it is an opportunity for the institutions to identify and recognise people that have been trafficked. What's the advantage? Not much. It prevents that particular victim being sent home. But if they're in the EU, there's no funds in Britain to send trafficked people back home. You can send people beyond the EU frontiers to China or to Vietnam. We've got money in the budget for that. But we can't send them back to the EU. You have to go to the embassy. So that's the one thing it does. It gives you a right to remain for 45 days. The second thing that the NRM does is give you the right to be housed and fed for 45 days. And our government has given the contract to a very well-established and highly respected organisation, the Salvation Army. And it's rather interesting, they operate it like this. They have a central pool of staff, a very small one. When they get called by the police, the health service, the social services, or an NGO, that they found a victim, or victim they think they found, they will call up the Salvation Army, and the Salvation Army will find the nearest NGO with a shelter to where that person is. So it's not quite like a hotel reservation, but it is a network, like a network of the Marriott or one of those. You ring up and they'll find the nearest Marriott to you. And that has been relatively successful. The numbers are quite daunting there. 60% are women, but 40% are men. Which again, until last July, we had no idea that those were the kind of numbers. So, this seminar, conference, exchange of views is terribly important to me personally, because we're trying to prove to the EU, which is pretty difficult, that parliamentarians A, are interested, B, they're going to have a focus in their own parliaments, and that we can do something in the next few years to fight human trafficking. You know, traffickers are much cleverer than us. They're much more nimble on their feet than we are. I mean, we're like an elephant compared to traffickers. We're like a gazelle. They're nimble, they're quick-footed, they're fast, and they'll move. And for example, trafficking from Moldova was very big for sex in Britain. The authorities suddenly woke up to it. Do you know why trafficking from Moldova to Britain has stopped? Because the traffickers have moved all the women to the Middle East. And now the figures in the Gulf states from Moldova are huge. That's how quick they are. Again, they don't hang about. Apparently in Israel, they're using every modern technology not to be met or seen anywhere. So it's done on the internet. Like ordering a pizza, you order a girl. And the car meets the girl from her flat, takes her to the caller. The car, the chauffeur and the pimp will wait outside, probably one behind the house or in the flat. When everything's over, the girls come out, she's got no ability to escape. And also, many of these girls don't want to escape because they're hooked on the business. So that is what we're dealing with. We don't know the scale, but we do know parliamentarians, in my view, are crucial to holding the government to account, asking difficult questions, and being a general nuisance. And that's what I like to feel I was to the Labour government when they were in office, and now we have got quite a few Labour members of Parliament in the parliamentary group, because there are 60 MPs. Their job is to make the Conservative government account for their actions and to be more proactive. So can I just say, it's wonderful we have now a wider spread of countries. We have Slovenia, who have started to take a very great interest in this. Why Slovenia, a tiny little country? They are, just like Poland, they're a transit country. They come in from the south and through Slovenia. We don't know the numbers, but we know it exists. We know one victim who actually went through Slovenia. Poland, we know there's a similar problem. But unless the politicians are much more proactive in getting the police more active, because in Britain, trafficking is not a high priority. We've got to make it more of a high priority. And unless we can get ministers to keep asking difficult questions, we're not going to succeed. So can I just thank you all for coming this morning. I don't want you to leave without actually thinking, can you get a group of parliamentarians in your own parliament involved? Now in Britain, our group is not accountable to anybody other than the parliamentarians. In Romania, the parliament, through the government, set up a subgroup which actually is doing an inquiry into human trafficking. I do know in Greece Human Rights Committee has set up a subgroup looking at human trafficking. So every country will do it in a different way. The problem is parliamentarians are unbelievably fickle. They have lots of interests, they have lots of constituency interests, they get defeated occasionally, and they're out. So it's important you have a group of people, not just one. So, Mr. Chairman, I think you've been appointed, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, can I first of all thank you for listening to what I have to say. I'm very encouraged what's happening in Poland. I'm encouraged by the members of Parliament who are involved. I'm encouraged you're here. And I'm greatly encouraged there are so many of you who are going to discuss an aspect, not the most exciting aspect, but an aspect of human trafficking. And I hope all of you who are here for the first time will feel able to go back to your countries and form a nucleus of parliamentarians. And we certainly have 2 excellent full-time staff for the next 18 months. And thereafter, I hope the Human Trafficking Foundation, of which I'm chairman, will be able to continue with the network in some way. Now, as we've got, I have filibustered for about 15 minutes. Baroness Brytyjska, I think, will do even better. But can I hand over to her to talk about the parliamentary group?